Thank you for joining me for another interview about philosophy here on the YouTube channel. Appreciate your comments and keeping the conversation going about some very important topics. And I'm really excited about this interview because meeting this gentleman in person for the first time and talking about really a couple of things. First of all, the connection between philosophy and depression. And also, he has the 15 keys to happiness. So we're going to tie this all into a number of philosophers, including Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, and maybe some others that pop into our conversation as well. I welcome to the interview Rob Olson. He is the president of the Dallas Philosophers Forum, which I have now become, I guess, unofficially a member of. Their website is philosophersforum.org, and their slogan, which I love, is philosophy made user-friendly. So, Rob, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Dave. Glad to be here.
Now, you don't professionally work as a philosopher. You're not like at a university.
No.
You have a regular job.
Right.
I know you do some side work in, prison ministry, and prison work and that kind of thing.
Right.
What's your background in philosophy, and did you major in it in college?
Well, I have a master's, an MLA from SMU in philosophy.
Okay.
But my vocation, so philosophy is my avocation, it's my love.
Yeah.
But my vocation is a research analyst and writer for a risk management publishing company. And so I do research and I write, and then also I've taught for 35 years at various universities on risk management. So I've taught at SMU, I've taught at UT Dallas, and then I also taught many years at University of North Texas. There's many corollaries, Dave, between insurance and analysis of words and the meaning of words, and like an insurance contract, and philosophy. Mm-hmm. So it's all trying to understand, what it is you're exactly saying, how to analyze things, coming up with your definitions, whether or not a claim's covered or not. And so there's definitely some relationships there.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But anyway, I've been interested in philosophy for many, many years, and then I got involved with the Philosophers Forum, and I'm also a member of the Philosophers, another philosophy group. And so I've done some presentations on Nietzsche and other topics, happiness topics as well. And then for the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've taught happiness classes for disadvantaged people, disadvantaged young women, disadvantaged girls, and teenage boys as well, talking about some of the keys to happiness. But I'm not a professional philosopher.
Yeah. I mentioned depression. I've had a couple of, I think, relatively small bouts of depression, and it's no fun at all. I know some people that are watching perhaps can relate to that as well. You have struggled with this yourself, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Throughout your life?
Yes, throughout my whole life.
Okay.
Yes. And bouts of poor self-esteem and all. Suicide ideation, it's called SI. Went through a whole lot of suicide ideation, and at one point was trying to figure out, what bridge I was going to jump off of when I was driving down the freeway. But I was having a bad reaction to a particular medication and all. So in dealing with the depression all these years, and I'm on medication for it now, and it seems to be very helpful. But in dealing with this, I got to thinking, what things can I do to stem this, to mitigate this depression? Besides just taking more and more drugs. And so I started reading voluminously about depression and happiness and all these concepts, and I got involved in reading a lot of Aristotle and Kant and utilitarians, Aquinas. And so I started reading a lot of books and articles, and I developed my own 15 keys. I'm not saying these are absolute. These are just the ones that resonated with me. Mm-hmm. These are the ones that were sort of like, I read them, I went through them, and they were sort of like the self-authenticating truth. They seemed authentic for me. Mm-hmm. And so then I developed these, my own 15 keys, and then the past few years I've been sharing these with people people you find in jails and in halfway houses and in really tough environments, mm-hmm. with a tough life, a difficult life, that without many of the advantages that you and I have had, depression is just rampant.
Yeah, yeah. Sure is.
And so it's sort of like giving back, and it's sort of a way of, one of the keys to depression, keys to happiness, Dave, is volunteer work, helping those that are less fortunate. There's been a multitude of psychological studies indicating that's a really effective way of mitigating depression.
Let me take a step back, because I want to get to all these 15 keys. But when we talk about happiness, is there a definition of happiness that most can agree on? Or I know that's kind of a general question.
That's a difficult one.
Yeah, I know what Aquinas would say, because I've done most of my work on Aquinas, and he would say it would be union with God.
Union with God.
Yeah,
that's right. And Augustine would say, prioritizing your love, prioritizing your love, and prioritizing your friendships and your deep relationships in the proper organized manner. The first one would be with God.
Yeah,
of course.
And also a connection to virtue. Virtue is what makes a man good. And of course,
right. And the Greeks talked about that as well. The ancient
so
Greeks
Aristotle.
talked about virtue.
Yeah, and Aquinas, of course, as you know, borrowed so much from Aristotle.
Right.
So let's talk about Aristotle, because he, as I recall, said basically that this is what all men desire.
Yeah.
They all want
Nicomachean ethics is what he wrote about.
You can't not want to be happy, right?
That's right. And it's like the greatest, it's sort of the end result, we develop friendships with the end result is going to make us happy. We try to become good at our jobs and make enough money to support ourselves and our families, with the end result that's going to bring us happiness. But the happiness was so like let's say friendships and virtue and all that. Those were like penultimate goals, with the ultimate goal being happiness. But Aristotle doesn't equate happiness. If you look in the dictionary, happiness, one of the examples might be happiness. It'll be, the definition, Dave, will be to be happy. And you look at if you look at happy, then the definition might be pleasure. But Aristotle didn't equate pleasure with happiness. He was basically saying that to live a happy life, you have to have it's a full lifetime project.
Yeah.
And so like a really, really young person can't have a happy life because he or she hasn't lived it to its fruition. And so, happiness is something that you have to build throughout a long period of time. And he wouldn't equate it with pleasure. So when I'm talking at the jails with the women, the inmates there, one of the key things is like, you have to give up this momentary pleasure and look at the long run. I mean, you might say, okay, I'm going to school, I'm going back, I'm getting my GAD, or I'm trying to go to, starting out in college and all, and my friends want to go out and party, and it's like, well, yeah, that's would be the most pleasurable thing at that moment. But thinking about it in the long run is, I have schoolwork to do. I have to get plenty of rest. I have an exam tomorrow. I have a paper to write. And so you're going to be giving up those momentary pleasures with a long-term goal of living a happy and fruitful, productive life.
It almost sounds like the old Purpose-Driven Life book. Remember that? I forget the name of the pastor out there in California that wrote that.
Was it Rick?
Rick Warren.
Rick
Warren, the Purpose-Driven Life.
Purpose-Driven Life, yeah.
And a lot of times, especially in our culture today, we think, power, we think money, fame, wealth, but you've got people that have all that are jumping off
That's right.
bridges.
Those things are transitory, and they don't bring happiness, the research shows.
Yeah.
And that's where Aquinas nailed it. That's where Aristotle nailed it. That's where Bertrand Russell, a more recent philosopher, nailed it so well. But
what did he say? Bertrand Russell.
Bertrand Russell talked about how in order to live a happy life, there's virtue. But in order to live a happy life, you need to have your interest as broad as possible. Broad interest in learning, in knowledge, and then have your reactions to people to be as docile, although assertive, docile and peaceful as possible. In that, what Bertrand Russell It's amazing. I watched some of his interviews on TV back in the 1950s. He was an amazing philosopher. I just finished reading his Problems in Philosophy. It's just really very challenging, very interesting. But he would talk about like, you want to be, like he would say, Dave, you want to be like an ocean. So if someone tries to contaminate you in some way, okay, if you're just you're a little cup of water, that poison is going to have a powerful influence on you. But if you're like a big lake, a little bit of poison, that's not going to impact you. You're still going to be able to drink that water.
Yeah.
And so, have your interests as broad as possible, but then have your reactions to negative things to sort of take the philosophy that everyone has a difficult life.
Yeah.
And I need to cut people some slack, and I need to focus on my own things rather than what someone might have said to me or some slight that might have occurred.
Yeah, almost sounds like if your whole life is wrapped around in your spouse
Yeah.
or your job
Right.
or your kids, and
Right.
then because any of those can be taken away
That's
from you,
right.
right?
They can
And
backfire.
so then you implode. Whereas if you're, I guess, using what you say, Russell's philosophy is, you've got, you may have all those things, and thank God you do, but a lot of other things that
You have a lot of other things going on, and then that also ties into the whole concept. I think Bertrand Russell would agree that ties into the whole concept of flow, getting into this flow of life, getting into finding your passion, finding what makes you happy, what makes you exuberant. And in the books that I read and the articles I read, it's like getting into this flow. And there's a psychologist, super long name, in California that came up with this concept of a flow. And so, I can tell one of your flows is philosophy, and mine is the same thing, and finding your passion. And then it's like you get involved in all these activities and these interests, Dave, and then you don't have time to ruminate on how unhappy you are. The brain cells, there's only a certain number of brain cells that you have,
Sounds like a diversified portfolio.
Diversified portfolio, that's right. Absolutely right.
I titled this, one of the titles of this is Battling Depression with Philosophy. It's interesting when you mentioned about your job, which really didn't directly have anything to do with philosophy. I think you kind of implied that knowing philosophy and being interested in philosophy makes you better at what you do. And I would almost think that would be the case with any job. If somebody, because a philosopher thinks, and a philosopher, tries to figure out what this is all about, and,
how to make it better, looking at things critically. That's one thing I tell my students is, you're working on your college degree, and so part of what a college degree teaches you and what philosophy teaches you as well is critical thinking skills, the ability to try and avoid groupthink, engage in critical thinking skills, thinking about the law of unintended consequences, what can go wrong, and that's what employers are looking for, is someone with critical thinking skills that can analyze these things, and that's what philosophy is all about, is looking at things in a critical manner. Now, I'll tell my students, you don't want to come across as a naysayer and always negative. You have to do it in a politically correct way, but to bring in these concepts of critical thinking, or the whole conversation may be about a certain word, but it's like everyone has a different connotation of that word, and that's what Socrates did. It's like, okay, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by compassion? What do you mean by kindness? And so that's one of the beauties of philosophy, is like, okay, we have to try and come up with our denotation. So many years ago, when I was I've been with Philosopher's Forum for many years, but we were arranging a debate on God, and we couldn't get the two opponents to agree on what the definition of God is. And so finally I just said, listen, we just have to go with a standard desktop definition of what God is.
The supreme deity or something like that. The creator of the world.
And because one that was taking a position, more of a non-theist position, he wanted a very different definition. And if the definition was really, really broad, then he would say, well, I can't take a non-theistic position on that. Because if it's Spinoza's God, the God of nature and such, then that's a more of a difficult position to argue.
Right. So they're on a different playing field altogether.
That's right.
I'm trying to think. Are all philosophers ultimately, seeking happiness? And I think of a guy like Jean-Paul Sartre or some of the nihilists, Albert Camus, which they didn't seem like happiness was their end goal, because it seemed like a very pessimistic philosophy. So not all philosophy is really aimed towards the happiness of a person.
No.
Right?
And if you look at just Aristotle, his biggest body of work dealt with things besides happiness.
Yeah.
He got involved in the sciences, as you know, and categorization and ethics and politics and art and all these spheres. So there's a big body of philosophers that don't go into eudaimonia. They don't go into the happiness. That's not really their focus. Though I would argue that if they're experiencing flow and they're really getting involved and they're deeply enmeshed in their philosophies, just like an architect can be deeply enmeshed in building and designing a beautiful building, then that flow, then the idea is that happiness will ensue from that. But,
well, let's get into some of your keys to happiness. Sure. I think we've done at least one: volunteerism, stepping outside of yourself. Right. I don't know if you've mixed in a few in the midst of the conversation already.
So we can go through.
Yeah, let's go through some of those and see if we can find some.
Okay. The first one is long-term friendships, deep friendships.
Okay.
So when someone says, "Oh yeah, I have 800 Facebook friends. I have hundreds and hundreds of friends." Well, one could argue that you might lack deep friendships. And deep friendships are more important than the number. Based on the research, they're important than the number of friendships.
Yeah.
Okay, because you only have time to really develop a deep friendship with a handful of people.
Yeah.
And so, surface level friendships where you're talking about the weather, and you're talking about the Cowboys, and you're talking about these things, that's one thing. But I'm not saying that's bad, but to seek and to find fulfillment, it's the deeper friendships where you're talking about the difficulties you're having, maybe with your daughter or with your son, or the problems you're having in your marriage, where you can really open up. And when women are much better at this than men, but men have to remind themselves that it's important to try and open yourself up, because it's sort of like problems shared are halved, and joys shared are doubled. And so
it's almost like a soul-to-soul connection.
Yeah, a soul-to-soul connection. Yeah.
Let's
say maybe someone is having difficulty with their faith. They feel like God has abandoned them, or whatever it might be. To find a compadre, a soulmate, where you can share those thoughts, because let's say that you're opening yourself up to me about some difficulties you're having. My role as a friend is basically to listen. Okay, not to pass judgment. My role is to take it all in, maybe rephrase it so I understand what you're saying, and then the act of you getting all that out of your system, it's that catharsis for someone that's listening, that's very, very engaged and such, that the research shows that's extremely helpful. That's a great catharsis.
Which I think ties into philosophy very nicely, because so rarely do you have a shallow conversation about philosophy.
That's right. That's right.
I don't know there's such a thing.
Yeah,
So.
but inhibition is physical work. It's difficult. It's hard on the brains. So you have all these problems, and you're not able to share it with somebody. Then what it does is it gets into this realm of this nightmarish realm. Whereas if you can get it out on, you can say those words to a friend, then it can take some of the danger out of it. Montaigne talked about how, my life was filled with all these horrible things, most of which never happened to me. We worry about things.
Yeah.
But, worrying, sharing those worries with someone can be, that you trust, can be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
So that's the first one that comes to mind.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
Expressing gratitude on a regular basis, appreciating what you have. So one time I remember vividly, Dave, when I was at the Dallas County Jail, and I asked the inmates, I said, "What are you grateful for?" And one young woman, beautiful young woman, she said, "I'm grateful about the fact that 1 year ago today, I was in some cheap motel shooting up heroin with my boyfriend who didn't really love me.
Yeah.
And right now, I'm learning skills. I'm with my sisters. They call themselves sisters. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm with my sisters who all want me to never come back here again. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my sisters. And I thought that was very profound.
Yeah.
So
she's actually happy and grateful in jail.
In jail.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
So our circumstances don't necessarily impact our,
but the word gratitude derives from the Latin word gratia, which means grace. And so the thing is, and we're going to talk about materialism in a little bit, not the materialism versus idealism, but materialism being a preoccupation with material things, which
that's a formula for unhappiness.
Unhappiness.
Right?
It's a formula for unhappiness.
Yeah.
And so, the idea is to look at what all you have, and let's say you're me, you're 65, you have all these aches and pains, which happens when you get into your 60s.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't have cancer, I don't have heart disease. I'm grateful for those things.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that I'm alive, that I can live in this beautiful, beautiful planet.
One thing that I find fascinating about Aquinas' teaching on happiness is that he teaches that it's involuntary. Like we have free will, but we can't turn off the desire for happiness.
Right.
Which almost seems to compromise our free will a little bit. It's like, you can't not want to be happy. So you're programmed in a certain sense, which none of us wants to feel like we're programmed. But and I think Aristotle might feel the same way. But Aristotle was more kind of a temporal happiness, where Aquinas kind of elevated it to a supernatural level.
Right.
Anyways,
and Plato did sort of in the same way with the forms.
Yeah.
Not in a theistic way, but with the forms, of the form of happiness. The form of virtue and such. And of course, Aristotle didn't buy into the forms idea. But
kind of parted ways, didn't he?
He parted ways with his teacher, but he still would say that Plato was maybe the master philosopher.
Yeah. So. Well, let's go through these a little bit quicker. I'm looking at the time here, and want to make sure we get to all of them.
Okay, so then the third one would be take proactive steps to reduce worry and overthinking. So sometimes we over-worry about these things, and we have too much noise. When I was going through my divorce, my counselor said, you have too much noise going on in your head, Rob, and you need peace. So she said, I need to read Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist teacher. And so, try to avoid overthinking and why did that person say that to me? Focusing on these exterior things rather than what can I do myself, and focusing on all that's beautiful in the world, and focusing on my projects and my interests and my goals.
Which is kind of hard.
We over worry about things,
Yeah, with a news cycle the way it is. Anytime anything happens, a guy drives a SUV through people up in Wisconsin. Everybody in the world knows within an hour.
Right.
And it used to not be that way. We know everything that happens instantaneously, mostly bad stuff. Because good stuff doesn't make the news, right?
Right. Or incremental improvements in society don't make the news.
Right. Yeah.
The fourth one is the flow that I talked about.
Okay.
So it was Claremont Graduate University psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I think. So here's his name.
I think you got it perfect. I'm not going to be able to do any better, believe me.
And then that goes back to this Bertrand Russell. Let me give you this quote. The secret to happiness is this: let your interests be as wide as possible, and let your reactions to the things and persons that interest you be as far as possible friendly rather than hostile. And I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
And remember, we're all on a difficult journey. We all have difficulties, and that people need to be cut slack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We want people to cut us slack.
Yeah.
We need to cut other people slack as well. Then the fifth one would be a forgiving attitude.
Okay.
And I don't remember which Catholic theologian said something like, "This is the cardinal virtue, is forgiveness."
Yeah.
Maybe it's Aquinas. I don't know. Maybe St. Augustine. This is a cardinal virtue, is forgiveness. The story that I give to the women in the jail is this woman, Amy Beale. She was an idealistic white college student, and she got involved in studying in South Africa, got involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and she was killed during this riot in Johannesburg. And the parents were obviously grief-stricken, but they wanted to know what happened. They went there, and they eventually found out who was involved in this chaotic scene that involved in inadvertently killing their daughter. And these two men showed so much remorse, and they wanted to atone for this horrible event. They wanted to do public service. They got involved in the foundation for Amy Beale, working with the parents, and that the mother and the father, they forgave them.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's amazing. And when you're angry at someone, it's sort of like you have a piece of hot coal and you're going to throw it at them, and yet you're the one that's getting burned.
Yeah, right.
You're the one that's getting burned.
It eats you.
It eats at you.
And
And Mandela, another story, Mandela was meeting with Clinton when Mandela got out of prison, Nelson Mandela, and Bill Clinton said, "I don't know how you can, forgive these people for what they did to you." And he said, "If I don't forgive them, then I'm the one that's being poisoned. It's like I'm still in prison, if I can't forgive them."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that if I continue to hate these people, I was still in prison.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a video recently, like on YouTube, of a young girl, teenager, whose father was a police officer, got killed by somebody, and during the trial,
Yeah, the one that was ski. Yeah.
And she said her only goal was to meet her father's killer and forgive him.
Yeah, not to lecture him.
Yeah, I don't want to lecture him. And she was a Christian, and she said she wanted to introduce him to Jesus. But I mean, this is like pretty immediate. This wasn't 5 years later.
Exactly.
This is
exactly.
I was
astounded. I was astounded by that.
and that goes to what you said. So she's already found the peace.
That's part of one of the big biblical principles is forgiveness.
Yeah.
And Jesus was right when he talked about how that's an important thing, and the latest research shows that that's good for, in dealing with, unhappiness.
Right.
So the sixth one would be spend excess money on experiences, not on things. So Socrates and Kant said that self-development and these rich experiences are a key to happiness, rather than going after material events.
So, because then you have it in your memory, and it's something that you always have with you. A car, I mean, you can have memories of a car, but it's like you've taken a trip, or you've gone on,
Right.
Yeah.
Graduation party, for your daughter or whatever it might be. So Epictetus talked about the essence of philosophy is that a man should so live that his happiness shall depend as little as possible on external things. And the Dalai Lama talks about that, and the Buddhas talked about that. One interesting thing is there was a longitudinal study done, Dave. I think it might have been in Michigan, back in the '60s. They did a test of these people, those that were very materialistic. They were preoccupied with making more money, getting more things. He who has the most toys when he dies wins, and all that. That I deplore that philosophy. And they went back, and there were some that were scored very high in materialism, and then some that were scored lower on that. And they went back and like 20 years later in this longitudinal study, and they looked at these, and they interviewed them, and took these standardized tests. And the ones that were very materialistic were much unhappier than the ones that were less materialistic.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty astounding.
Yeah. They're very interesting.
And then the next one would be volunteer work.
Yeah,
we talked about that one.
Activates
this powerful pleasure signal in your brain. Committing to a goal or project. We talked a little bit about that. The flow. Have a goal. Have a have a project in mind that it's like people retire and they think, I can rest.
Yeah.
Rest is not good for you.
Right.
Right. Rest can too much rest can bring on depression.
Right. When you're actively trying to achieve a goal, or things like that,
and
your
so
adrenaline's
often,
flowing.
And you merge that one goal with serving others. Starting a non-for-profit, perhaps. The ninth one is lower your expectations of always being happy. There's this obsessive cult of positivity and all that, and some of these positive thinker people, I don't always agree with their methodology. That you should always be happy and always look at things, and we can't always.
You're
be
not
happy.
Act happy.
Yeah,
right?
We can act happy. Samuel Johnson challenged the Enlightenment thinking, saying that humans had initially thought suffering is their natural condition, and then the Enlightenment is like, okay, happiness is our natural condition, but yet when we're not unhappy, then we think, well, I live in this land of plenty. I live in America. We're not at war, and I have all these things, and yet I'm not happy. And so then it's like you're condemning yourself. And so to expect that you're always going to be unhappy, always going to be happy, it's unrealistic.
Right.
And you're being too hard on yourself.
And the irony is that you're going to actually create unhappiness.
That's right. Right. Exercise is another one.
Okay.
The 3 E's. Are we running out of time?
Yeah, we might want to go through the last ones kind of quickly.
Exercise, healthy, intimate relations. We talked about that. Faith in some type of higher power is a very, very, very important one. Tocqueville talked about religion serving admirably to temper our more rapacious earthly cravings. You're focusing on living the golden rule. You're focusing on how you can help others. You're focusing on loving your God as yourself. And then you're not going to be so smitten with all these material things, all these temporal things.
Yeah.
Meditation, deep breathing, prayer would be another one. Then controlling your anger. A lot of the women in the jail have lots of problems with anger. And so part and parcel with that is to be assertive, not passive, and not aggressive. So find that, Aristotle talked about that mean as far as, don't let people take advantage of you, but don't take advantage of other people. So you have to be assertive and not passive. And not aggressive.
Yeah.
So it's finding that golden mean.
Not a doormat, but also not the, my way or the highway kind of person.
Right.
So right in the middle there.
That's right.
Well, those were interesting. Thank you for sharing those with
pleasure.
us. I want to, we're going to start wrapping this one up. I want to ask, I always ask every guest 2 questions. I'll ask you one question in this interview and the next one and then your top 3 philosophers of all time.
Ooh, well, I'd have to put Aristotle. I'd have to put Aristotle up there. I would have to put Bertrand Russell.
Okay. Was he linguistics? Was he into that
he
kind
was,
of the more modern linguistic turn,
he
right?
was. And then, oh boy.
One more.
I certainly like Locke.
Okay.
I certainly like Locke's position on. I mean, some of his ideas were those that Jefferson was influenced by.
Empiricist, right? Would Locke have been considered? Yeah.
Yep.
And then was it Berkeley and Hume that kind of
Bishop Berkeley?
followed?
Followed some of that. But Locke was very. He was very much how do you say? He's a super influential philosopher. So I guess I would have to put those 3 near the top.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much. I've
Okay.
enjoyed it very
My
much.
pleasure.
And so covered a lot of ground here. We talked about a lot of philosophers. So appreciate very much. Rob Olson, again, the Dallas Philosophers Forum. If you happen to be in the Dallas area, that's where we're broadcasting this. Their website, philosophersforum.org.
Right.
And it might be something that would be a good fit for you. And
our website has the video recordings of them as well.
Okay.
Audio recordings.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thank everybody for watching.
My pleasure.